Welcome to the fifth in our series of video time capsules commemorating the 75th anniversary of the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I'm Larry Lynch, University Archivist at UW-Eau Claire. It's Thursday, May 14th, 1992. We are going to talk about the past, present, and future of this university in addressing the theme of the 75th observance, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I'd like to begin by introducing our panelists. On the left is Dr. Ingolf Vogeler. Ingolf is chair of the Department of Geography and a professor of geography. He's been at Eau Claire since 1977. He was the general editor of a state geography series published by Westview Press and other presses, and has numerous other publications to his credit. He has done some very creative work in the past few years using HyperCard and other computer programs in the teaching of geography, especially using Eau Claire as a focus. To Ingolf's left is Joan Coonprom. Joan is just completing her senior year with a major in political science. She is originally from Chippewa County, having been born in Chippewa Falls. She's particularly interested in economic development in developing nations. She spent 6 years, from 1982 to 1989, in Thailand, working for 2 relief and development agencies, and just finished moderating a discussion on political correctness just a couple of days ago. To her left is Dr. Richard St. Germaine. Rick St. Germaine is Associate Professor in the Department of Foundations of Education. He is the formal tribal chair of the UW-Eau Reservation in northern Wisconsin and is co-author of a resource manual for teaching about Chippewa treaty rights prepared for the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. Rick graduated from UW-Eau Claire in 1969 in secondary education. To his left is Janice M. Bogstad. Jan is assistant professor and head of collection development here in McIntyre Library. She's been at Eau Claire since August of 1990. She and I arrived at the same time on this campus. Among her many research interests is the role of women, and especially the alien as a metaphor for women in science fiction literature. Another interest and area of expertise is the study of Chinese literature, especially the 10th to the 12th centuries and the 20th century. Most of her publishing to date has been in science fiction criticism. Jan says that although she likes computers, she loves books, and has brought a few just in case anybody didn't know what one was anymore. To Jan's left is Peter Watson. Pete is a sophomore studying sociology here at UW-Eau Claire. Pete went to Vietnam in 1973 before finishing high school. After that, he managed an insurance office in Minnesota and was production manager of a company manufacturing uniforms in Phoenix, Arizona before deciding to attend a university. He completed his GED through testing before starting at UW-Eau Claire as an adult student. I'd like to start our discussion by characterizing the campus culture at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. Many people have commented on the unique qualities of this campus. Many regard it as a particularly friendly campus, and I think we'd like to kind of test that assumption by simply giving various opinions on what it's like to either be a faculty member or a student or a support staff on this campus. Ingolf, do you want to start with that?
Well, after being at Northwestern University for 3 years, I appreciate one characteristic of Eau Claire, and I think this is true of many of the former normal schools in the state, and that is that the concept of academic freedom, which is really the hallmark of what a university is about, to explore ideas, how you teach, with total freedom without fear that you're going to lose your job or be penalized in some way. Yeah, that has real meaning in Eau Claire. Academic freedom can really be pursued. You can do the things that you want to do as a professional and feel confident that you're going to be probably even rewarded for it. And I've always cherished that, because my idea is that an academic has to pursue the ideas as they emerge. Places like Northwestern, on the other hand, PhD granting institutions, academic freedom is essentially restricted. If you don't publish the right kinds of books in the right kinds of journals with the right kinds of publishers, basically you're not going to have tenure. And so it's a very limited concept in the so-called PhD institutions. And I think Eau Claire's academic freedom, the climate of academic freedom is a wonderful thing, and I think it's the greatest single asset. But on the downside of that, I think it is largely in the context of what I would say academic ignorance. That is, Eau Claire still suffers under the normal school mentality, and it has the idea that professionalism and scholarship and research are at best marginal, maybe even suspect of really what we should be doing here. In other words, we should be doing essentially only teaching. If we miss a class to go to a professional meeting, that there's something really wrong with that. Our students are going to be shortchanged. So on the irony is that although there is this academic freedom, it is really, in a sense, because people don't cherish professional activity and scholarship. And I can demonstrate that because it's been institutionalized. For example, we have a $100,000 curriculum improvement fund, which is very unusual for a university like this, for academic growth and potential. But if you apply to give a paper, if you're actively doing scholarship, you won't receive any money from that fund. But if you are a passive professional and you go to a workshop to get trained, there is money for that. Until about 2 years ago, sabbaticals were given like that. If you said you wanted to do research, sabbaticals were denied. If you said you were going to go back and get more training to become a teacher, sabbaticals were supported. We're gradually changing that a little bit, but I think the mentality is that we should be teachers for the sake of being teachers, and I think a university is more than a high school, is more than a community college, and it is that distinction is that you are professionally and scholarly active. But we need to get our rewards and our institutional mechanism to line up with what we say we are and what most people think we are, but we often don't do that.
Do you think this is a friendly campus for people that are just arriving, either students or faculty or staff?
I think so. I mean, a place can always be friendlier, but I think generally it is a very easygoing kind of campus. I think the Haas tradition established this as sort of a family. People were taken care of. I remember stories in the 60s when there was a massive layoff and people went to Haas and said, "Now, couldn't you do something about it?" And he took care of things. And so there's been this family atmosphere, which again has its strength, but it also, of course, encourages and tolerates incompetence and makes rooms for people who shouldn't be on campus. These are all downsides sides of a relatively, I think, friendly and collegial atmosphere.
Joan, you're just graduating after 4 years, and you've been around the world. I don't know about other campuses you may have been on, but how have you found it to be a woman on this campus and an adult student?
Well, my husband and I both returned here students in '89, and that came right on the heels of having spent 6 years overseas. So returning to school at that point, first of all, I was suffering from a little bit of reverse culture shock. The predominant whiteness of the student body was a little bit to adjust to, and then also being an adult student. Again, you have predominantly, well, shall we say, I'm reluctant to use the word college age, but traditional age students, and as an adult, you feel a little bit out of place in that way as well. As a female, I can't say that there was any particular obstacle to overcome there. I think that it was, again, the predominant whiteness of the campus, and also being an adult student in this environment was a little bit to adjust to, but that came. I mean, the first semester was a bit rough, and then after a year, you get used to the environment that you're in. I think in terms of strengths, as I say, I haven't been on a lot of other campuses, but I would say one strength that we have here is class size. I mean, you can get to know your professors, you can interact, and it's not that you're, I guess that's the key thing is the interaction. You're not being talked to all of the time. There is that opportunity to give and take. I don't know.
Do you feel that there is experimentation going on as far as different methods of delivering education on this campus, or is it pretty strictly a lecture receiving sort of an atmosphere?
I think it is still predominantly lecture oriented. I think there is some experimentation going on, and I think that's good, but I would say that it is still predominantly lecture oriented.
Why don't you tell them, though, about your experience? I mean, obviously, if you're motivated like you are and you have more experience, you have ideas about what you want to learn, and you can go out and get those independent studies
That's right.
and learn on your own. And I think that's, again, a nice example of what you can do in Eau Claire.
Yeah, there are opportunities for freedom. I put together a topical minor, which was it gave me a lot of freedom to focus on what I wanted to focus on, which is economic development in developing nations. And in the course of that, I did one independent study with Dr. Vogeler, in fact. So, and we worked very well together. I think that we both learned a lot in the process. So yes, there is that opportunity for freedom.
Rick, how have you found this campus to be in terms of your own experiences and what you may be able to comment on other students coming, especially possibly American Indians?
First of all, I'd like to say that I think the campus is student-oriented, and it has a strong guide toward the student in comparison to some of the campuses I've both been a grad student and worked at. So that's a feature, I think, of UW-Eau Claire that's clearly a positive. There are professors that are available to the students. There is a smaller class size. The students, the faculty is fairly oriented to teaching as opposed to research, and I've been on some campuses where the only orientation was research. So there are some real good pluses for the university. I've had two experiences at Eau Claire as a student and as a faculty, and on both occasions I went into deep culture shock when I arrived here. I came from a reservation community where practically all the people were American Indian, coming to a campus where there were two other Indian students. I was a faculty member at University of California, Berkeley, where the student body was made up of almost half of American ethnic people. And then I arrived here in '89 from Berkeley, and again became dizzy because I just couldn't comprehend there being such a void in a diversified cultural environment. And the students and many of the faculty members reflected that neglect of world culture. We have some states in the Union which are moving, according to the 1990 census, in a direction of ethnic minority people becoming the majority population of those states. And many of those are located out on the West Coast and in the southern border states. But right next door here to Minneapolis, Minnesota, by the year 2003, that city is going to, again, reflect a diverse population, a world culture. And so it's getting close to Wisconsin. This is a state that surrounds all of the campuses with American Indian communities, and yet we only have a handful of American Indian students represented in the student body. There is neglect. There is a lack of concern. The people that make up the university in previous years have not had much of an interest in the diversity and the pluralism of the United States. And so I think this creates a challenge. I think this is one of the promises of the future, looking down the road for the campus. This really creates a challenge for this institution to do something about that neglect. Something dramatic has to be done because the future is definitely oriented to a world economy and to relationships that expand beyond some of the cultural voids in Wisconsin.
I've noticed there's been quite a large number of brown bags lately on American Indian topics and other topics that are filled overflowing. I don't know exactly why that is, but have you seen any changes in the time that you've been here?
Absolutely. I work with students in human relations courses, and I also teach various Indian history courses on campus. And The attitude of my incoming students is clearly reflects the mentality of the boat landings in some cases. Some of the conflict and some of the prejudices and the biases of people who are residents of northern Wisconsin. But I think it's a matter of just simply providing good, hard information and facts about treaty rights and other issues concerning third world people. And once they receive the information and once they have some exposure to speakers from the outside and the brown bag presentations that many of the faculty members are making, I think all of those things are going to be an effort that needs to be stepped up on this campus, because Wisconsin is going to be surrounded and it's going to be full of other peoples. The university campuses in the state have only about 2% of third world people represented in its enrollment, and yet 55% of the prisons are filled with ethnic minorities. So something has to be done about that.
Rick and I serve on a committee. He's the chair of the Indian Studies Committee. And one of the things that we've been working on is trying to get a major. And I think one of the challenges of the future, to tie into the present situation, is that we have not had administrative support to have, a director or even part-time staff assigned to the teaching of something like a major in Native American studies or indeed in women's study. But instead the resources have been flowing to honors. So the resources are there, but the commitment does not match the rhetoric. And I think that's clearly what we need to do in the next 20 years, is to deal with the hardcore group of students, which are the bulk of the students, not the few that are real good. They're going to get a good education. And I think we need to come to grips with that issue.
One thing I noticed as you were speaking, and you referred to the attitudes at the boat landings, and it took me a moment, first of all, to realize what you were saying, but I think some years hence, people may not know the significance of what that
that's
means.
true.
So
That's right.
you might want to explain that
It's
a
not
little
Columbus coming, right?
No.
Yeah.
The boat landing.
The boat landings, to me, represent being hit by rocks and stones and insults that are hurled by people who oppose the treaty rights of American Indians. And I felt the rocks. I've actually been hit with rocks, and things have been said about my heritage and about even my mother by people who are angry, white people who are angry. And that's the kind of violence that we have in northern Wisconsin today. And some of that violence is reflected in the thinking of students who enroll in some of our campuses as well. So it's quite a challenge. It's going to be a challenge in the next 50 years or so to deal with that attitude.
Jan, what's your perspective after having been here a couple of years and having a lot of interaction with various departments through your collection development activities and your various interests and presentations? How do you find this campus?
Well, I've also had the advantage of being on 3 Wisconsin campuses. I've worked on 3 campuses. This is my 3rd. I got my education at UW-Madison and worked there. I was a teaching assistant as well as a librarian. I was also an instructor in River Falls as well as a librarian. So I've had several ends of this. And in addition to that, I grew up in the Eau Claire area. And I gave some thought to whether I wanted to come back to Eau Claire to work after having grown up around here. But the vision that you have inside of the campus is very different from the one that you have outside. Things may have changed recently. I've noticed that there's a lot more community interaction, and that programs like the debate program that originally got me interested in a college education, well, it was one of the factors anywhere, that I came to in 1967. Well, there seem to be a lot more programs like that where students are brought from high schools to the campus so that they get some idea of what it means to go to a campus. When you grow up in a rural area in Wisconsin, and in fact this was said to me as a child, people really, it's sort of like sensory deprivation. People really do not know that there is another way to live. And when I was 15 or 16, that's how I thought of it. I was very depressed because I kept being told that there weren't any other people in the world like me, that no one else was interested in what I was interested in. And then this campus was right here. I didn't live that far from Eau Claire, but it just seemed like this was a world that we didn't enter. I hope that that's changing. From the inside, I have noticed, and in comparison with other campuses, the Madison campus and a couple of other small campuses where I've worked, I've noticed that there is an advantage in both the largeness and the smallness of our size. In the largeness, in that there's enough possibility that there will be 2 or 3 other people on the campus who share one of your interests, whereas at a smaller campus, often there is no one. The advantage of the smallness is something like I think what Ingolf was talking about, and that is that no one thinks you're stepping on their toes. I haven't run into anyone at this point who has said to me that my research interests, that I'm not doing a good enough job in them and they're doing a better job, so I better stop. And this happens at larger campuses all the time. This is my area, I've colonized it, forget it. It also happens when you're working as a librarian, where in a larger campus, people colonize their areas. And so this was one big advantage of the small campus I worked on. I was allowed to work with computers because no one else was interested at that point. Campuses of our size, in Wisconsin in fact, have some advantages for their students that the larger campuses don't. Not just the class size, but also access to electronic resources. We discovered to our surprise, my husband is in graduate school in Madison, that he must get special permission to be part of an email network. But every student on this campus can join the email network, every staff member if they want to, and communicate with people in Finland. You know, it's such a rush. Finland, Germany, England. I made friends while I was studying at Oxford at a library seminar that I can now communicate with almost instantaneously. And the possibilities for scholarship in the future and for people to engage in scholarship and not have to physically go someplace are just incredible. The only thing I worry about with that is what happens to the community of scholars, what happens to that physicality, the synchronicity, that kind of interaction. I found this to be a rewarding campus for the reason that you are not, at least I don't feel yet, defined into a slot. I don't feel like people are telling me I must only be a librarian and a librarian is this particular kind of thing. I've had my research supported. I've been given money to give papers at conferences. I've been encouraged to apply for teaching abroad opportunities. So, you know, there are lots of advantages here that you don't have on either end of the spectrum.
Do you think being in a somewhat removed from major metropolitan areas, but sort of close, Chicago, you know, Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago, Twin Cities, is there an advantage to being at a distance like this and yet still being able to be in contact with those resources?
Well, it's hard for me to say about that. I experience a certain amount of frustration because there are some resources here that I would like to have access to. There isn't. I work on Chinese. There's practically no material in Chinese here. I'm interested in Provençal literature. There's practically no information on that. But on the other hand, I can be in Madison anytime I want to and stay there for a weekend or 3 or 4 days. So it's hard for me. I don't feel like I live any place. So it's hard for me to feel how people might feel if they don't have a pied-à-terre in another city. Mm-hmm. If they can't spend a weekend in Minneapolis at the libraries, or in Madison at the libraries, or taking part in the cultural activities. I was very surprised to discover that I don't really want to live in Madison again. On the other hand, yeah. I had an opportunity to go back, and even though my husband's there, we're hoping to get him out rather than getting me back. So,
you know, another thing that's a real strength, I think, of Eau Claire is that the librarians here are really teachers. They're not just clerks in the sense of shelving books. They're really here to help students and faculty teach them how to use these resources. It's the only campus that I've encountered where you can go to a reference librarian and say, you know, here's a geography class, teach them how to use the basic geographical research materials. They'll put together a little workshop, show them things. I mean, just wonderful exercises. And I think that's true of almost all the support staff. And I think it's a real strength, not just for faculty, but also for the students.
And it really
Real.
enriches your job.
Exactly, for
yes.
everybody.
I gave a
Yep.
presentation on early medieval materials. And not only did we discuss physical materials in the library, but we discussed electronic access to medieval studies listservers. And as a collection development librarian, I am somehow supposed to be able to have a basic understanding of all the fields we teach here at the same time that I'm supposed to understand how publishing works and how we get access to materials and whether to buy video or CD-ROM or paper or who to advise to do what. So
But
it's
isn't
really
that
good
special in Eau
atmosphere.
Claire that the librarians are more sort of part of the whole teaching mission? In big universities, I always thought of them as sort of just librarians.
It is actually something that's changing
Is it?
for librarians also. But it's the larger the institution, the harder it is to change that
Yes,
metaphor
yes.
of what a librarian is. And also, the more restricted people get in what they're allowed to do. You know, someone who does advanced research in an area may not think that a librarian should be able to tell them something about their work. And I have run into that. But on the other hand, at River Falls, I also gave workshops on researching geology and geography in the listserv, in the database, electronic databases, and I taught classes of students how to formulate their searches so that instead of taking an hour to do one for somebody, it took me 12 minutes or 10 minutes. So that's happening in other campuses too.
Pete, you've had a long journey to get to this campus, and you had to overcome quite a few obstacles to pull it off, and you've had a lot of experience out in the business world and so on. What's been your experience?
I arrived on this campus January 1991, and I was put in the category as a traditional student, and I was given an exemption where I had a probationary period for my first semester. And that come about because I did not have a high school diploma. I had a GED, a high school equivalency, that I got just 2 months prior to coming to the university. So as far as my relationship with the students and faculty is concerned, I think it was very good. I was accepted into the programs, and I enjoyed much support from my fellow students and a lot of help from the faculty members. But there are some programs that I was introduced to that were developed, I believe, to help non-traditional students that I think don't quite meet the need of the non-traditional student, in the sense that if, for instance, in my case, I'm a parent and I have 4 children and a wife, and if we just take the look at the insurance program that's offered here on the campus, it would be geared towards a single person, which is fine. Being in the insurance business myself, now part-time, before I came here full-time, it's easy for me to see major pitfalls and problems, and where it's really not a good situation for a non-traditional student coming in that has a family, where it may benefit to some degree a non-traditional student that doesn't have a family. So I think we've touched some of those things on the surface, but we need to go a little deeper. As far as being able to actually get into the flow of the campus and become part of the campus, that is a little bit difficult too, because you have all the other demands. I still have my work demands, I have family obligations, and a full load of courses. So it becomes very tough to go to a ball game of, this type of thing, and to actually become sort of one of the gang. So from that perspective, I think you always still kind of sit a little bit out on the outer rim. And also in some of the basic courses, because you've already had some exposure and your experiences are a little broader than the average student, sometimes you will perceive things and introduce things in class situations that maybe be a little different than the average student might introduce. And if it's not done correctly or calculated, as I like to think, sometimes it's misinterpreted by the faculty member as off base. And I've learned never to express my opinion on a test before I express it in class. First, to get some sort of feedback. Speaking a minute about the educational freedom academic freedom, as you put it earlier. I agree that that exists, but only to a certain degree. There are some barriers. For instance, going back to the basic courses in my selected major, sociology. Being married for 15 years and having 4 children, I think that some of the basic courses I could probably forego. A wife, marriage, development type course, that type of thing, because I've already experienced that to my satisfaction. Everything is fine as far as I'm concerned. Maybe I don't need to go back into work on that. And what happens is I end up sitting in that class because it's a required class, absolutely unchallenging. Bored, but I have to go, I have to be there, I have to read the text. Maybe for some students that come back in this type of situation, it might be better to develop a situation where you can go ahead and choose alternative classes. One other comment I'd like to make about positioning people in classes. When I came here, I took a battery of placement tests, math, English, and so on and so forth. And I can understand that to a point. It's fine to know what you've learned up to that point. But I think it fails to look at your ability to learn. And that if you've only come up to a certain point, let's say you had, well, I'll use my own example. I had an F on a objective English exam. 19 questions out of 60 was all I got right. It was the lowest in the class. But at the end of the class, I had an A-, and I was 3rd from the top in the class. So the ability to learn is important, and I think we have to have a measurement device also when we're looking at non-traditional students coming into the system that not only shows where they are, but equally as important, what they can achieve. And I don't have any ideas how we would actually get to that, but I'm afraid that maybe this blocks out or excludes some people that might turn out to be excellent students.
In fact, I was thinking about something that's related to that very issue. I think that in education now, we're trying to move from, maybe clumsily, maybe slowly, from the belief that education is about learning a profession to the idea that education is about learning. And I think one of the reasons this is happening is that people have many careers in their lives, and the lifelong learner is now the model for the future. I can't myself, well, for example, just take computer technology. I have had to learn 7 different word processors since 1980. And all sorts of other different things like that at each job, they're a little different. And so we're going to, I think we're putting increasing emphasis on it, but we're going to have to even put more emphasis on how you structure a learning process for yourself, because no one is going to need to learn the same things that you're going to learn. At every position I've been at, it's a different group of things I couldn't have gone to a class for. I had to put them together myself. And I think that's going to be something that's a challenge to our educational institutions as well as to our students.
One more point I would like to make about the educational opportunity too and the flexibility. Another thing that has to be looked at is the demand that is placed on the student, not just from the administration here as far as what courses you're going to take in your major, but also you have an obligation if you have a job. If there are some monies being made available to you to return to school, or if they're providing time off and keeping your job intact for you, there are obligations. And they like to see, for instance, in insurance, they want to see maybe some communications classes, maybe some business classes. So I did what Joan did, which was built a topical minor. And there are rigid barriers. For instance, in the School of Business, where I had to get 36 credits waived in order to get into some courses that folks that I worked for wanted me to take. I think I ended up getting a signature from everyone, from the janitor to the dean of the school, in order to get into this. And I think, again, from a non-traditional sense, you have to take a look at that too. What are the pressures being put on from outside? What is the employer looking for as far as he wants some return on his investment too? And that channels a little bit the student in where he needs to go or she needs to go. And I think that's important, maybe something that could be looked at and developed a little bit more in the future too. More on the lines what they do at technical schools, actually.
Well, I think that's the challenge for the faculty, I think, in the next 20 years is to really internalize this idea that we're in the business of learning, because I think our curriculum is in many ways a major obstacle to really what we're really trying to get about. And there are legitimate prerequisites and sequences and things like that, but this idea, for example, that in sociology you couldn't have taken independent study, which would have been substituted for the introductory courses, that can be done right now. That's a mindset that is just, the faculty are the problem in that case. That can be done. Now, the problem of schools, I mean, that's part of the world. It's like state, Wisconsin has a different land use rule than Minnesota. So some of those things are harder to change. But I think ultimately the faculty needs to address how they're going to use computers effectively. You know, that you have different writing assignments when you have computers. Things have to be rewritten. You don't just give one assignment, because then the computer hasn't helped. You just kept $10,000 instead of $1 to write papers. And we need to be more creative. That's why these topical minors are important. We've proposed, many of us, to have a topical major, but you can't imagine the resistance that the faculty, and not the administration, the faculty opposed to that. You know why? It's too much flexibility. And on the other hand, we tell students they're adults and they should be responsible, yet we put a lot of barriers, you're right, in their way to prevent them from really becoming grown-ups.
I think another thing we need to deal with, though, is that people who are outside the university who influence how we're funded still think in terms, I think very much in terms of dollar per head.
Yes.
And the degree as some sort of end of a fixed process that doesn't continue anywhere else, and stages of validation, that sort of thing, and how much it costs to be validated. I don't know how many students I've heard express the concern that their parents want to know why it's taking them 5 years or 5.5 years or 6 years. And in fact, it's that very rigidity that's causing that. And yet I'm not sure that the parents would understand, or people outside of the university, or the governor would support an educational system that doesn't reward with a piece of paper in a certain way at a certain time. And you know, a sequence of courses that someone can, it's almost tangible, someone can touch and say you've gone through the sequence. I'm really surprised to hear that an introductory level sociology course, for example, doesn't deal with, you know, by implication with what you're saying, doesn't deal with some of the changes in the nature of people's roles in society based on their gender, what social gender is, how those roles might change, and give you a different perspective than you might have had in one person's experience. Because I think what a course should do, any course, anything that you're learning, is to take your experience and compare it to a lot of other people's, rather than telling you what it should be.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think what happens in my particular case is I'm looking for something that I'm apt to be able to take out and use in other circumstances. And I don't, even though I understand the different roles and how they may apply in different circumstances, I'm probably not likely at this point to make those changes within my own set of circumstances. And all I'm looking for is the flexibility that you talked about is being espoused by business everywhere. And then I come to the institution of UW-EC and see rigid barriers. They say in the Department of Business in an honors class that I had, read Deming. So I read Deming. And Deming says we need to eliminate barriers, we need to eliminate fear. Of course. So I take the challenge back to the professors and I say, fine, I want to take 2 of your upper level business courses. It requires 36 credits. I have this background in insurance, this background in production management. I feel I got basic economics, basic accounting, all those down. I want you to help me waive 36 credits so I can get to them classes. Let's see if the walls of Jericho can shake a bit here. And in fact, they did, but it took quite a bit. It took quite a bit of effort on the part of the professors. The chairman had said he had never seen such a proposal the first time I brought it to him. But with a lot of work, it did work. So I think we need to look at flexibility. I understand your point about learning new ideas, but it comes to my mind that there are certain things that I've already established and feel comfortable in. My family, my wife and my children are comfortable with. Even though I look at new roles and even maybe accept those new roles, I may not really apply those, and possibly I could be spending, maybe my time would be better spent in, like you said, a directed study or an independent study course.
Joan, I wanted to
Well,
get that perspective.
I think that it is true that we are still very, very rigid, and I at one point compared my experience here with the Department of Motor Vehicles. You have all of these rules and regulations and things that requirements you have to meet. And I, of course, had similar experiences to Pete. And a case in point is a foreign language requirement. Now that is to give you a breadth of experience in the world. Well, now I had just spent 6 years in Thailand. I am married to a Thai. I have a fair capacity in the Thai language. And yet, because this institution does not have the ability to test me in that language, I have to take another language, one that is offered here. So I spent a year studying another language. But it won't hurt me in the long run, obviously.
But time you could have used doing something
exactly.
else.
Well, or minority studies. I mean, why not have people who are knowledgeable about Indian affairs substitute for a foreign language? Why do they need French and Spanish when we're living right here in Indian country? But I mean, these are administrative things that the faculty can change. I mean, literally, we could meet tomorrow and change these things. These are changeable things. But it has to do with the attitude, and also it has to do, Rick, I think, with the context. You got to remember where we are. We're in the Midwest, in the northern Midwest. We're in western Wisconsin. This is a rural, small-town, white, very homogeneous, not only racially, but ideologically, too. It's a non-controversial kind of place, and you do things the way you've always done them, and you're not a questioning society. You're not a society that changes things, even if you need change. The old Norwegian bachelor mentality that goes on. And it's not at a university level, but I think that's part of the culture in which Eau Claire finds itself. So there are lots of individuals who actually make change, but institutionally it's going to be a long haul.
I think that right now this effort, this commission to redefine the baccalaureate is meeting varying degrees of success. I think it's a good effort, but I hope it will be successful in looking at some of these issues. What does a baccalaureate degree really mean? What does it represent?
See, I predict that the mindset of the faculty is not fundamentally transformed, that exercise will give you structurally something different. That 50 years from now, a person like you is going to have the same damn problems. No way. Because what we're going to do is combine new, creative, integrative courses, like history and literature, whoopee-doo, and Indian studies and geology, whoopee-doo. But ultimately, you're going to have these still prerequisites, these narrow credit requirements. We're not going to give the students the responsibility to take what they want, but also to fail. And that was the point I was going to get back to you. One of the reasons we have all these restrictions is you let students into classes, then they fail, and then they said, I paid money, and I don't, I want to pass this class. Why did you let me in? Why didn't you tell me I couldn't take it? So we have to also make the students responsible, that if you want to take something, you have the responsibility to study and know whether you're capable of taking the material. And if you don't, you fail out. And a lot of the students aren't willing to take that responsibility. That's why you get caught on that one.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a good
Yeah.
point. I think that it is important that if you get let into these higher courses, that yes, you are responsible for it, good or bad. It's your effort that's going to be measured. It's not a guarantee of a grade, in other words, because you were let in. And my perception is not that it's a guarantee of a grade, but an opportunity to take that course, meet that challenge. And I think that in my own particular case, I'll probably put just a touch more effort into those courses because I was granted the right. And I wouldn't want to ruin that opportunity for another student that might come along. If I do well, maybe they'll give someone else a chance too.
Rick, I wanted to ask you a question. We've been frozen in a certain kind of educational system everywhere pretty much since the beginning, basically. And people have talked a lot about different ways of teaching and different ways that students can learn and different opportunities. And it seems like there are some things that are starting to emerge, that you can get out of the classroom and go and experience it instead of hearing about it, actually doing it. Can you conceive of, if you could just redesign the whole thing, how would you go about it?
We know that people learn in different ways, and we know that people, also faculty, tend to teach in the way they learn best. And the research is full of those kinds of experiences now, and it's making educators more aware that there are differences in learning styles, and I think this campus needs to be cognizant of that. There are some isolated examples of innovations in teaching and learning on this campus, and they are isolated, but I have seen, my brother comes down here from the reservation once a week, and he takes his class out into the field, and he goes to the woods, and he exposes them to different techniques of Indian learning styles. And we do have people here from different gender and different minority groups who have been reared in different ways, and they follow their practices of the ways they've been taught by their families in their different cultures. And women certainly have a variation in what they learn and how they learn. And we need to be much more aware of that, and I think in the next 50 years, again, this university and the others in Wisconsin must pay attention to that.
Do you think it's possible to find different ways of teaching in all subjects? Or, I mean, is there just a few in the humanities that you can do this in, or are there ways that we can loosen up the whole system and find different ways? Right?
In our School of Education, Jack Whooley has provided a course for the faculty each semester in which he provides instruction on teaching techniques and methodology, and he's exploring some innovation. And I think this is something that needs to be expanded. I think we need to create an opportunity for the faculty to become aware of teaching styles and instructional methodology and so on.
Is there a way that any faculty member could approach their own class? Is there a kind of steps that you can take to try to think of creative alternatives to the lecture format? Is that kind of methodology available to do that?
Absolutely. The summer institutes that are being sponsored by various departments and organizations, not only on this campus, but on Indian reservations and in the community. My brother has a summer institute on the Red Cliff Reservation, in which he's opened up the opportunity to faculty members to go and participate in that 1 or 2 week event up on the reservation, in which they meet with tribal elders, and it's wide open. Anyone who wants to participate can go up there for a 1 week period and take part in this and learn something about cultures and teaching and so on.
Ingolf, you've experimented with use of computers in many of your classes, and you've done some very original things with local architecture in Eau Claire, combining it with income levels and immigrant background and all kinds of things. Have you come up with any sort of principles that could be applied in other classes?
Well, I think it's being an effective teacher. Since I have a PhD, which is a doctorate of philosophy, neither did I take ever a philosophy course or know Latin, in which my degree is found. I have, like most university teachers, thought about thinking, and I think a good teacher is someone who reads the literature but ultimately experiments. And that is another one of the great virtues of Eau Claire, that I have been able to pursue teaching strategies and ideas. And one of the ideas was to use computers and large computerized data sets that make sense to students. They're not just abstract theories, but to involve students in research. And so I've developed a course to collect data on architectural styles, to use the public assessment records, and now the city directories. And each year the students' projects add up to being a larger database. And my retirement project was to be basically a community atlas where all of the data from the 30 students each year who collect this information is going to be one big gift back to the community. But those kinds of ideas are frequently have to be done on the sly, because the institutional structure, which again we control, the university is not, we control it, the faculty. But for example, to get 4-hour chunk of time together, which is what we use to go around to different parts of the community, can really only be done in what I still call interim, which the university is trying to eliminate now, but that 3-week period between the end of spring and summer when the students were taking one course and one course only in which you could actually have that time. During the regular academic year, part of the innovation is limited because students have so much time conflict, let alone conflict with their work. So if you really want to do a field type kind of a course or experiential course, I mean, I don't know how you do it. It's very difficult to structure. And so we need to institutionalize special times or places or days in the week so people who want to do certain things can find that institutional support. And along another line, I might suggest we need to also get over the bias of how we teach. For example, the fact that we need 2 hours of contact for a lab and only 1 hour for 1 credit of lecture shows the bias. We are already saying to everybody, students and faculty, lecturing is the superior mode of learning than lab is. I mean, why would you spend twice as much time, this is usually an overload. So again, you see, our ideology of rhetoric about learning in different styles is not met by institutional response.
I wanted to pick up on something that you said about your course, where you're building up a database. I've heard of other courses like this, one in specific where the book Grapes of Wrath is used to teach history, sociology, family structures, various other things like that, and the students are adding on to this database year after year. On the library side, what librarians are trying to deal with right now is how the existence of all this information that's in electronic form, principally, is going to be accessed and archived. And they've come up with a concept called the virtual library, where there may be physical buildings that hold materials like books, but they're also electronic archives. They're part of an electronic archive that are linked from one place to the other, so that, say, when you finish your retirement project, or during the process of doing your retirement project, or this other course that's run out of another Rutgers, I think it is, but I can't remember exactly. I mean, I'm not absolutely sure that that's true. That material will be available to scholars all over the world. We have the frameworks already in place. We don't have the people who can deal with it. I don't know why that is. I talk to librarians who are afraid to join a listserver. And I use, 5 electronic systems a day between the shared cataloging networks, our in-house cataloging, our various kinds of software programs, the email networks. And many librarians do that, but then there are other librarians who don't, and there are faculty who don't. Most of the faculty that I work with in Madison, I'm working on my dissertation right now, are not on an email network. It's just amazing. I cannot send them information. And
but I think that gets to the issue of style, and I think what Rick says, that some people aren't comfortable in the electronic mode, and I guess that's all right, as long as they contribute with a strength in a more traditional, because we're always going to be ebbing and flowing. I don't think we need to, in fact, the strength of an institution is not to all jump on a bandwagon. I've seen this too much happen in education, where all of a sudden, you have the open classrooms, all the walls are knocked down, and then the whole school district's full of these idiotic buildings that can't be used. So, I mean, it's better to have some people who really like computers and use them, and other people who are still back on the classic and looking at the hard
You
copy.
don't think that there's a basic literacy level in various areas? I mean, if someone can't read and write, they can't get an education. And I've seen this barrier because I know people who are dyslexic. Computers have changed that, but sometimes they can't get the faculty to accept the use of a computer to assess their ability. And so therefore...
But everybody has their own learning curve, and institutions in the aggregate have learning curves too, and you can't, it's just like a student is at a certain intellectual or moral stage. You can't be that far ahead of them. They won't catch up. And there's no sense of putting a computer on every faculty's desk, because it'll just sit there. They won't do anything with it. There's this sort of mindset that you give people the technology and they'll figure out how to use it. Yeah, they'll make other things out of it. I mean, there are examples of this about birth control in India. They make a little altar out of it. I mean, we have to be careful about, I think, one of the exciting things in Eau Claire at the moment, because we got this Title III grant from the federal government, easy money, and we tend to get sucked into these trends, is the technology for its own sake. And I think as a university, we need to keep in mind what it is we're about. And we're about pursuing truth and about knowledge in general, and whatever tools it takes. Field trips, sitting in a sweat lodge, going to Southeast Asia, working in an insurance company, those are the issues. Using a computer, maybe. Not using a computer is fine too, because you know a lot of email, it's a bunch of garbage. People are sending messages around the world saying, hi, how are you doing? What's the weather like in Oslo? I don't think we need this to be better human beings.
But there are things that you absolutely cannot do and cannot have access to otherwise.
Exactly.
I mean, I know personally there are many things like that. I don't think I was really saying that everyone should be able to do the same thing. I think what I was saying is that there are certain basic resources. In fact, I think that people are going to have a basic literacy with computers in the future, in the very near future, because I don't think we can afford the kind of dinosaur that our educational system is right now. There is all sorts of duplication all over the place that doesn't need to be there, and there are certain very key areas that are not being covered. Because the resources are all used for basic things. I think one of the things that's going to happen is there are going to be centers of certain kinds of learning. And we'll have people having to go to these centers, different ones for different parts of their education, and then communicate electronically for other parts. I think that probably within 20 years, some kind of electronic communication system is going to be part of everybody's everyday life. It may be in their pocket. It may be in their brain. I hope it's not that way myself, but that's what people are speculating, that it'll be so necessary. And then people will have to learn new ways of processing all of that information that they're having to deal with.
I'm afraid we've about run out of time. I wanted to conclude with the fact that this is a video time capsule. And just in a few seconds, I'd like each of you to think about somebody that might be watching this tape in the middle of the 21st century, let's say in the year 2050. And you're here in 1992 with a beautiful campus and trees and an environment that still exists. What message, just in a few words, would you like to send to somebody in 2050? Pete, why don't you start?
Well, I think if I was sending a message to one of my grandkids in the middle of the next century, I would simply say it might seem a little chaotic right now, the way we're doing things, but we're doing it and we're working hard on it to try to make things better for you. So I would leave it with that.
Okay. Jan?
I don't know. Mostly what I would say is I hope you're still there. And I hope that people have started to work in space and to work together. Especially, I hope that people have learned the truth of the fact that we're going to have to live together, learn to live together as a global community, or we're going to not live at all.
Rick?
I guess my wish for the future is a resolution to the problem of the haves and the have-nots. And we're very much in a nation that is a class society between the wealthy and 72% of people who are not wealthy, and who have been told that they're the middle class, but for other reasons they're in the lower class. And I hope that we've got a resolution to that problem.
Joan?
I have two thoughts. One that struck me was that I hope that in 2050 that people are able to look at AIDS and cancer as we view the plague from our perspective. I think that's one thing. I'm going to be interested to see what progress is made there. But more importantly, I also hope that the whole issue of diversity and multiculturalism is no longer an issue, that we have become an integrated society, that we have unity, we have differences, but that we have unity, and that we don't have to make special attempts to make this happen.
Ingolf?
Well, I guess I think the future will bring a lot of what I would call superficial changes that will, for some people, seem rather profound. But I think ultimately we'll be talking about the same basic power relations. And the power relationships don't go away, whether they're between the rich and the poor, between racial categories, whether they're administrators who are trying to centralize power, and the faculty who are trying to experiment with teaching. And so I think fundamentally our human condition will be the same. We might be using different terminology and look differently, but it'll still be the same.
I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Ingolf Vogeler, Joan Coonprom, Rick St. Germain, Jan Bogstad, and Pete Watson. This concludes our 5th video time capsule commemorating the 75th anniversary of the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire.